She called me a burden in my own home, so I sold the house out from under her. They tried to silence me with guilt, until I found my voice in a courtroom, a podcast, and finally, a book. This isn't just about a mother-in-law feud. It's about the cost of erasure and what it takes to rewrite your place in the world. She burned the bridge. I built a path, and I walked it alone, with fire at my back and freedom ahead. I live in a pale blue house on the outskirts of Knoxville, Tennessee, tucked between rolling hills and the faint hum of highway traffic. My name is Helen, and I've lived here for nearly 30 years, first with my husband David until cancer stole him away, then alone until my only son Gavin returned home 3 years ago. When Gavin introduced me to his wife, Brielle, I was relieved. He looked different, varied, burdened by grief. I'd lost my husband, he'd lost his father. I thought a partner might fill the hole. Brielle was everything a mother-in-law might hope for at first glance. She was tall, with chestnut hair that caught the light. Her smile was bright, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it for this meeting. "Your mom's home's lovely," she said, stepping inside the living room. The curtains were the same dusty yellow I'd ironed every week. The lamp beside the sofa was on its third lampshade since David's death. I led them inside, chest tight and hopeful. A month later, Brielle moved in. Gavin explained it was temporary. "Until I get rent sorted," he said. I nodded, offering the guest room and the last of my hospitality. That first week was smooth. We ate takeout at my round dining table, sharing stories. Brielle complimented my chili. I learned she worked in marketing. She asked about my volunteer work at the library. I let down my guard. But then the line between guest and occupant blurred. It started small. A plate left in the sink overnight. The thermostat bumped down when I'd sweltered through July nights. I blamed jet lag. Then there was the night I found my lace curtains folded in the laundry room, replaced by synthetic blinds. We never spoke about it. I told myself Brielle wouldn't notice them again after moving in. I realized I no longer felt at home. Dinner conversations turned into quizzes. "Are you sure that's how you made pot roast?" she asked, voice smooth as silk. I bristled at the tone. Years of pride in that recipe docs scraped away in a second. I nodded absently, spooning sauce onto Gavin's plate. In the mornings, she'd stand in the kitchen next to me, closer than a guest should, brushing her hair back casually. I felt out of place in my own home, like I was pushing into her space. "Don't you think this espresso maker looks better on the counter?" she asked, patting the machine. My coffee maker, gift from David, sat behind it, half hidden. I shook my head, but when I came downstairs the next morning, mine was gone. "You sold it?" I asked. She looked at me, then at Gavin. "You said you wanted space," she said softly. Neither of them met my eyes. The machine was nowhere to be found. There was a calmness in her control that chilled me. I'm a mild person, kind, careful. But that cold ease felt like a threat. I tried to keep things gentle, served her favorite jasmine tea, showed her my favorite writing nook by the window. But every gesture of kindness felt swallowed by her silent judgment. Her civility carried its own cruelty. I started to measure my presence, how often I sat at the table while she hovered, how many steps fell between us. I measured the silence after I spoke. I noticed how Gavin's eyes flicked to her when I said something in my southern accent. Then she invited friends, women from her work, over on a late Saturday. They gathered in the living room, whispering about digital campaigns and yoga classes. I sat with tea that got cold before I drank it. I waited for her to introduce me, but she didn't. I forced a smile when I passed them, and they nodded politely, a small icebreaker that froze me. Late that night, after they'd gone, I flicked off the table light and tiptoed to my closed bedroom door. Brielle's laughter from their gathering drifted down the hall. Gavin and Brielle stood in the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I paused by the doorway, hearing both their voices. "You do realize," Brielle said softly, almost tender, "that this is still her rules, her stuff, her space." "Sure," Gavin replied. I braced myself, gripping the doorframe. "It's her house. She's not family," Brielle cut in. The words came soft but sharp. "She's a burden." The word, burden, fell heavily against the wooden door. In my chest, something snapped. Gavin didn't reply. They stood there in the glow of the fridge light, saying nothing more. I exhaled, stepped back, and let the door shut quietly. I didn't want them to notice I'd listened, but I heard it all. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, the ceiling familiar but cold. I pressed the sheets tight to my chest, repeating one question like a prayer. She's not family. She's a burden. That was the moment the ground shifted. The moment I realized I no longer had a home. Not the home I built, the home I held together for 30 years. I closed my eyes, but sleep would not come. I lay there thinking about memories. David's laughter in this living room, Gavin's first steps on the hardwood floor. How these walls used to echo with love. Now they echoed with betrayal. I rose at dawn and walked through the halls. I looked at photos on the mantel, my wedding picture, David beaming as he held me close. Then one of Gavin as a toddler, face streaked with chocolate, arms wrapped around my legs. In both photos, I was wearing that bright, easy smile. I remember that woman. I walked into the kitchen, heart slowing with each footstep. I brewed a cup of coffee, in the machine Brielle hadn't replaced, and sat at the table alone. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains she'd folded away. Lace. I ran my fingers across the table's edge, feeling its polished warmth. A quiet fury gathered in me, not rage at Brielle, for her, not grief for Gavin, but a fierce clarity like a bell refusing to toll. Something inside me told me this was no longer about coexistence. It was about survival. She's not family, she's a burden. That was her verdict, and I was listening. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when my days were stretched taut with purpose. When Gavin was little, my entire life bent around his needs. I taught preschool art and cleaned houses part-time to pay the bills, came home late, feet aching, and still made sure his favorite peanut butter toast was waiting for him after homework. I missed college. I missed romance. I missed anything that didn't involve him, and I never once considered those things regrets. So when Brielle came into his life, I welcomed her with open arms because I believed I was finally gaining something. A daughter maybe, a partner for Gavin, a friend. But what I didn't know was that she wasn't adding herself to our family. She was replacing it. It began subtly. Brielle started reorganizing the kitchen. At first I told myself she was helping. Then my favorite skillet disappeared. A week later, the spice rack I'd built from hand-painted mason jars was replaced with sleek, labeled tins. Just something cleaner, she said. Gavin didn't notice, or he pretended not to. Then there was the grocery list. She started making it without me. I found myself reaching for ingredients that no longer lived in our pantry. When I mentioned it, she smiled and said, "I thought we could try simplifying. Your recipes are a little old school." I remember standing there with a can of cream of mushroom in my hand, heart thudding in a way I couldn't name. That Sunday, I made dinner. A roast, the way Gavin always loved it. I cooked for hours, set the table, and called them down. They came, eventually, late, whispering, giggling like teenagers. I waited for the jokes to end, the attention to return to the table. But it never did. They ate quickly, barely touching the food. I asked Brielle if she liked it. She said, "It's fine, just heavy." I swallowed hard and nodded. After that night, they started eating out more. Uber Eats became a frequent guest. I'd find half-empty takeout boxes in the trash, right above the untouched casserole I'd made. Then my books disappeared. My copy of Little Women, dog-eared and underlined from college, vanished from the living room. I asked Gavin if he'd seen it. He shrugged. "I think Mom's losing track of stuff again," Brielle said lightly, her voice so casual I nearly missed the blade beneath. I wasn't losing anything. I was being erased. One afternoon, I went to the coat closet to grab my gardening gloves. The storage bin that held them was missing. In its place, Brielle's labeled acrylic boxes, scarves, seasonal decor, scented candles, and themed tins. I found my gloves in the garage, shoved inside a paint-streaked bucket. I confronted her. Just once. "Have you been moving my things?" She looked up from her laptop, unbothered. "Oh, maybe I cleaned a bit. The house felt cluttered. Didn't think you'd mind." Cluttered. That was the word she used. Not homey. Not lived in. Not yours. Cluttered. Each day I felt my footing dissolve, like standing on a river rock while water rushed and rushed until I no longer recognized the shape beneath me. It was in the way she rewrote things. When I'd mentioned something I'd said the day before, she'd blink and smile and say, "I don't think that's how it went." Or worse, she'd turn to Gavin and ask, "Did she say that? I must have missed it." Gavin, my son, would chuckle uncomfortably and say, You two are always on different wavelengths. That dinner, that smile, that chuckle, it chipped at me. And so did the whispers. One night, they sat close on the couch, phones out, grinning. I brought in tea, just a simple gesture, and Gavin quickly clicked his screen off. Just some boring texts, he said. I smiled, but the air inside me turned cold. Later that night, I opened the iPad Gavin had gifted me years ago. I rarely used it anymore, but I had a feeling. I clicked open the Messages app. There, in the group chat labeled Family, where holiday plans had once been coordinated, baby announcements from cousins shared, birthdays remembered, my name was gone. No Mom, no Helen, no Trace. The group name had been changed. Our real family. The messages were filled with pictures of Gavin and Brielle's brunches, inside jokes, plans for vacations I was never told about. There was even a photo of the spice rack she'd installed. Finally modernized the kitchen, she wrote. Heart emojis followed. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't storm into their room. I didn't even mention it the next morning. I just sat in the guest room I used to call mine and stared at the wall, wondering how long I had been living like a ghost, and whether I had helped build the house that had now locked me out. To anyone else, Brielle was radiant. She beamed at church, nodded respectfully during community meetings, offered cookies at neighborhood barbecues with the kind of warmth that made people say things like, Gavin's lucky to have her. And maybe he was, if all you looked for in a partner was polish. But behind our front door, Brielle was something colder, precise, calculating. She smiled like it was her job. And in a way, it was. At home, her tone shifted. No overt cruelty, nothing you could name without sounding paranoid. But everything changed. Little things, every day. She set the thermostat to 65. I'd nudge it to 70. Minutes later, it'd drop again. You're always hot, she'd say sweetly, barely glancing up from her phone. Lunches disappeared. I'd prep tuna salad, label it, store it in the fridge. Hours later, gone. She'd shrug. Maybe you forgot to make it? My photo frames started disappearing. It began with the hallway wall, pictures of Gavin in elementary school, a family vacation to Myrtle Beach, David holding Gavin in his arms while fireworks burst in the background. I came home one evening, arms full of groceries, and the wall was blank. Water damage, Brielle said, walking past me in yoga leggings, hair slicked back from her workout. Didn't want the frames to mold. I searched the house, found them in the attic, wrapped in towels, buried beneath holiday decor. In their place, a canvas with the words live, laugh, love, in cursive gold. Gavin saw my expression. She just wants it to feel more like her space, Mom. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because if I screamed, I'd be the problem, so I nodded. I was always nodding. That night, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a dusty notebook, one I'd tucked away when David died. Inside were old notes, grocery lists, an unfinished crossword puzzle. I flipped to a clean page. Today, she erased the beach trip, said it was water damage. I remember the sand in Gavin's shoes. He cried when we left. I closed the book and slid it back under the drawer liner. Brielle had changed the dinner routine, too. She meal prepped on Sundays now, color-coded Tupperware for every day of the week, filled with quinoa, chickpeas, baked chicken breasts. My recipes disappeared from the fridge door. My cookbooks shoved into the closet beside old board games. I offered to cook once. She said, "We're trying to eat clean." The words stung. Gavin never stood up for me. He just floated between us, like Switzerland in a war he didn't want to name. One afternoon, I came into the kitchen and saw her wiping down the granite counter, humming softly. "This is my home," I said quietly, not accusing, just stating. She didn't look up. "Then act like a guest," she replied, "and stay out of the way." I stood there for a second too long, the weight of her words pinning me. I wasn't Helen, the mother, the woman who raised Gavin. I was a problem, an intrusion, a relic of a life she hadn't built. I returned to my room, the one that used to be Gavin's nursery, and sat down at the desk, opened the journal again. She told me to stay out of the way. This used to be my hallway, my kitchen, my son. Now I feel like I'm squatting in a museum of my own life. That evening, they had friends over. I stayed in my room, the sounds of laughter bleeding through the vents. My name was never spoken. I sat in the glow of a single lamp, rereading David's old letters. I thought of the house as a body, each photo removed, a vein cut, each silenced dinner, a breath lost, each comment too sensitive, too dramatic, too controlling, a quiet dismembering of who I used to be. This wasn't home anymore, it was her kingdom, and I had been politely dethroned. I was raised to be small. Not physically, I was a tall child, sturdy like my father. But in voice, in presence, in permission, I was trained to shrink. I was raised in a home where the men sat first, spoke loudest, and were never wrong. My mother, Elaine, was a statue of quiet compliance. Her pearls never left her neck, her lipstick never smeared, and her lessons were always whispered. "Don't be the kind of woman people resent," she'd say, folding towels with militant precision. "Be the one they forget to criticize." Grateful, silent, invisible. Those were the virtues I inherited like hand-me-downs, worn smooth by generations of women who never asked for space, only permission to breathe. I was 17 when I got my first job at the corner diner, working long shifts and slipping dollars into a sock drawer for college. I wanted to be a teacher maybe, or a writer, something that gave me a voice. Then came Gavin, and the dreams folded neatly next to my name. Motherhood swallowed my identity with a gentle hand. I loved Gavin with every cell I had, but I didn't notice how I stopped using my own first name. How mom became not just a role, but a mask. Until Brielle, I didn't question it, but lately I was remembering things. I found the photo one morning while cleaning the storage closet. A shoebox of loose pictures curled at the edges. There I was, 19, in a borrowed leather jacket, standing near a motorcycle I never rode. My hair was wild, my smile even wilder. That girl didn't flinch. I stared at her for a long time, wondered if she'd still recognize me, wondered if I still had time to become her again. That week, I walked past the community center on my way to the pharmacy. A corkboard out front advertised local programs. One flyer caught my eye. Memoir writing for women 50 plus. Find your voice. It sounded silly, until it didn't. I signed up. Twice a week I sat in a folding chair among strangers who looked like me. Creased, tired, unfinished. We read prompts aloud. We wrote stories about the first time someone told us no, or the last time we told someone yes. I didn't read my writing aloud. Not yet. But I wrote. One afternoon, I left my notebook on the coffee table by mistake. When I returned, Brielle was thumbing through the pages. "Cute," she said, her smile brittle. "Is this your retirement rebellion?" I stared at her. She handed the journal back like it was a grocery list. "Just don't forget we still need dinner by 7. I didn't reply. That night I didn't cook. No announcement, no apology. I left the kitchen dark, made myself a sandwich, and ate it in the den while a rerun of Murder, She Wrote played quietly. Gavin came home, sniffing the air. "Did you forget dinner?" "No," I said calmly. "I just didn't make any." He stared at me, confused, unsettled. But he didn't argue. The next evening, Brielle ordered takeout. She made no eye contact. Gavin set 2 plates, not 3. I ate in my room alone, in peace. The silence became my boundary. And in that silence, I started reclaiming something. But the house had other betrayals waiting. A week later, I opened the mail. Among the usual catalogs and bills was a letter from a credit card company. It was addressed to Gavin, but it listed my home address, and the last 4 digits were unfamiliar. I almost tossed it, assuming spam. But something made me stop. I opened it. Inside was a transaction summary. Thousands of dollars spent in recent weeks. Spa treatments, boutique fashion, a weekend rental in Atlanta. The account was under Gavin's name. But I knew better. He hadn't left the county in months. I tucked the paper into a folder in my closet. I didn't tell Gavin. I didn't confront Brielle, but the weight of it settled. She wasn't just erasing me. She was carving a new world, using my roof, my address, my son's name. I wrote that night in my journal. Paper walls, heavy doors. She thinks I won't knock, but I'm learning how to build exits. And I meant it. I was raised to be small. Not physically. I was a tall child, sturdy like my father. But in voice, in presence, in permission, I was trained to shrink. I was raised in a home where the men sat first, spoke loudest, and were never wrong. My mother, Elaine, was a statue of quiet compliance. Her pearls never left her neck, her lipstick never smeared, and her lessons were always whispered. "Don't be the kind of woman people resent," she'd say, folding towels with militant precision. Be the one they forget to criticize. Grateful, silent, invisible. Those were the virtues I inherited like hand-me-downs, worn smooth by generations of women who never asked for space, only permission to breathe. I was 17 when I got my first job at the corner diner, working long shifts and slipping dollars into a sock drawer for college. I wanted to be a teacher maybe, or a writer, something that gave me a voice. Then came Gavin, and the dreams folded neatly next to my name. Motherhood swallowed my identity with a gentle hand. I loved Gavin with every cell I had, but I didn't notice how I stopped using my own first name. How mom became not just a role, but a mask. Until Brielle, I didn't question it, but lately I was remembering things. I found the photo one morning while cleaning the storage closet. A shoebox of loose pictures curled at the edges. There I was, 19, in a borrowed leather jacket, standing near a motorcycle I never rode. My hair was wild, my smile even wilder. That girl didn't flinch. I stared at her for a long time, wondered if she'd still recognize me, wondered if I still had time to become her again. That week, I walked past the community center on my way to the pharmacy. A corkboard out front advertised local programs. One flyer caught my eye. Memoir writing for women 50 plus. Find your voice. It sounded silly, until it didn't. I signed up. Twice a week I sat in a folding chair among strangers who looked like me. Creased, tired, unfinished. We read prompts aloud. We wrote stories about the first time someone told us no, or the last time we told someone yes. I didn't read my writing aloud. Not yet. But I wrote. One afternoon, I left my notebook on the coffee table by mistake. When I returned, Brielle was thumbing through the pages. Cute, she said, her smile brittle. Is this your retirement rebellion? I stared at her. She handed the journal back like it was a grocery list. Just don't forget we still need dinner by 7. I didn't reply. That night I didn't cook. No announcement, no apology. I left the kitchen dark, made myself a sandwich, and ate it in the den while a rerun of Murder, She Wrote played quietly. Gavin came home, sniffing the air. Did you forget dinner? No, I said calmly. I just didn't make any. He stared at me, confused, unsettled. But he didn't argue. The next evening, Brielle ordered takeout. She made no eye contact. Gavin set 2 plates, not 3. I ate in my room alone, in peace. The silence became my boundary. And in that silence, I started reclaiming something. But the house had other betrayals waiting. A week later, I opened the mail. Among the usual catalogs and bills was a letter from a credit card company. It was addressed to Gavin, but it listed my home address, and the last 4 digits were unfamiliar. I almost tossed it, assuming spam. But something made me stop. I opened it. Inside was a transaction summary, thousands of dollars spent in recent weeks, spa treatments, boutique fashion, a weekend rental in Atlanta. The account was under Gavin's name. But I knew better. He hadn't left the county in months. I tucked the paper into a folder in my closet. I didn't tell Gavin. I didn't confront Brielle, but the weight of it settled. She wasn't just erasing me. She was carving a new world, using my roof, my address, my son's name. I wrote that night in my journal. Paper walls, heavy doors. She thinks I won't knock, but I'm learning how to build exits. And I meant it. My body always knew before my mouth did. The vertigo started first, a wave of nausea that rolled in while I stood at the kitchen sink, blinking at a plate I couldn't remember washing. The room tilted just slightly, enough to remind me I wasn't steady. Then came the insomnia, thick and clingy like smoke in the walls. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, heart racing as if it expected something terrible around the corner. I knew what it was. Stress, suppressed grief, living with ghosts that refused to stay quiet. I started spending more time outside, sitting on the back steps with a blanket, watching dusk roll in. I'd press my fingers into the earth, as if trying to feel something solid beneath me. One afternoon, I opened a yellow file folder with the house's deed and mortgage documents. My name. Just mine. The proof sat there in black and white. I stared at the numbers and wondered what it might be worth now. Not for money, for freedom. 2 days later, I called a local realtor, quietly. She met me at a coffee shop downtown. Her name was Marlene, mid-50s, all efficiency and no fluff. I liked her. Looks like your neighborhood surged lately. she said, running comps on her tablet. You'd be surprised what that house could get. I wasn't surprised, but I was finally interested. The next day I started to purge, box by box, memory by memory. My wedding dress, lace yellowing, buttons missing, was folded into a donation bag and carried to the back of my car. It had lived longer in my closet than David had in my life. Old letters were sorted, some burned, some kept. I emptied the den first, moved furniture, pulled up the aging carpet with slow, careful hands. Beneath the musty threads was hardwood, deep, golden, wounded in places but honest. I stared at the raw grain, knees aching, palms dusty. Sometimes you have to strip things down to what's real before you can start again. That night, Gavin walked in from work and paused at the doorway. What happened to the carpet? I didn't look up from the floor. It was holding mold, had to go. He nodded but said nothing more. He didn't ask what else might be next. I think some part of him knew. I began setting up small showings with Marlene, early morning appointments when Brielle would be at work and Gavin was distracted. I hid the flyers, kept my voice low, but my energy shifted. Something in me straightened. Brielle noticed. She narrowed her eyes at the soft humming I did while cleaning, at the fresh flowers I brought home, the lavender I planted in the window box. You seem different, she said one day, watching me make tea. I smiled. I suppose I am. That week, I filled out the listing paperwork, signed the disclosure statements, sent the title copy. All legal, all mine. I was under no obligation to tell them, so I didn't. Until the offer came. The night before it did, I couldn't sleep. I went to the laundry room to get a glass of water. That's when I heard them, Brielle and Gavin, in the living room. Their voices low, but sharp. She's acting strange, Brielle hissed. Like she's planning something. She's been through a lot, Gavin said, tired. Maybe she's just reclaiming her space. Brielle scoffed. That space should be ours now. Once the remodel starts, it'll make sense. A pause. Gavin, she continued, we need to talk seriously about assisted living. Somewhere nice, not an institution. Just somewhere she can be managed. I stood frozen in the hallway, hand around my water glass, hearing the sentence again like an echo in a cave. Managed. As if I were some wild dog in need of a leash. They didn't know I'd already listed the house, that within 48 hours their plans would dissolve like smoke through a screen door. I returned to my room, my heartbeat a steady war drum. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I wrote something else. A goodbye letter, not to them, but to the woman who had kept apologizing just to be allowed to exist in her own home. I ended it with a single sentence. You were never the burden. I cooked like I hadn't in years. Roast beef, mashed potatoes with real cream, green beans sautéed in garlic, and warm rolls browned to a perfect edge. The table was set with David's old china, ivory with faded gold trim, and I ironed the tablecloth that hadn't seen daylight since Gavin's graduation. It wasn't about making peace. It was a farewell. Brielle stepped into the kitchen just as I was lighting the candles. What's the occasion? She asked, voice sharp behind a practiced smile. Dinner, I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. Right. Gavin arrived late, briefcase still in hand, tie loosened. He smelled like takeout and too many compromises. Wow, he said, surveying the table. What's going on? Just dinner, I repeated, pulling out a chair. We sat. The clink of silverware against porcelain was the only sound for several long minutes. Brielle picked at her food, lips pressed thin. Gavin tried to make conversation, small talk about traffic, some new project at work, but it wilted between us. The air was too heavy. I waited until the plates were halfway cleared. Then I placed my napkin down gently and folded my hands. I've sold the house, I said. Silence hit the room like a dropped plate. You what? Brielle asked, her voice ice over steel. I've sold it, I said again, my tone calm, unwavering. The offer was finalized this week. You both have 30 days to make arrangements. Gavin stared at me, fork halfway to his mouth. You're overreacting. I tilted my head. To what, Gavin? To being erased? To being spoken about like a burden in my own home? He opened his mouth, closed it. Brielle stood. You can't do this. You didn't even discuss it with us. This is manipulation. No, I said softly. This is reclamation. She scoffed, furious and helpless. You're throwing away your family. I looked at her then. really looked. The designer blouse, the manicured nails, the carefully constructed outrage. And then I looked at Gavin, who couldn't even meet my eyes. "I'm saving myself," I said. No one moved. The roast sat untouched on Brielle's plate. Gavin's wineglass trembled slightly in his hand. I stood, took my plate, and walked to the kitchen. That night, I didn't hear them arguing. I didn't hear them packing or whispering about what they'd do next. I didn't care. For the first time in over a year, I slipped under my covers and slept. No tossing, no listening for steps outside my door. Just sleep, deep and clean, like something sacred. The next morning, I made myself coffee and sat by the window with a pad of paper. I started jotting down apartment listings. Small spaces, sunlight, maybe something with a balcony. I didn't need much, just enough for one, and no ghosts. The apartment was small, but it had light. A sunlit corner unit on the second floor, just above a bakery that opened early and filled the hallways with the smell of cinnamon and fresh dough. The walls were a blank canvas, the floors real wood, and the silence, uninterrupted by slammed doors or biting remarks, was the kind of quiet that felt earned. I moved in with only what mattered: a suitcase of clothes, my writing journals, 2 framed photos, one of Gavin as a toddler, one of David laughing on the back porch. Everything else, I let go. I bought secondhand furniture from a nearby thrift store. A soft blue sofa with one arm a little frayed, a coffee table etched with rings from someone else's history. Each piece felt like it had stories I didn't need to erase. I painted my own art for the walls, abstract blooms and quiet blues, not to impress, not for aesthetics. Just to say, this is mine. Every morning began the same. Coffee in a chipped white mug, window open, a breeze soft enough to stir the curtains. I'd sit in a wicker chair beside the window, a book on my lap, and breathe. No footsteps down the hall, no refrigerator slamming shut. Just peace. One afternoon, I passed a flyer taped to the laundromat door. Neighborhood Book Club meets Thursdays. All readers welcome. I went. The room smelled like library glue and instant coffee. A half circle of chairs, women and men in their 50s, 60s, some older. I sat beside a retired nurse named Sandy who wore red glasses and laughed loudly at her own jokes. By the second week, I was bringing muffins. By the third, I was leading a discussion on Toni Morrison. I didn't mention Gavin or Brielle. I left them out like a chapter I didn't feel like rereading. Lorna visited that month. She brought flowers and wine and a giant cinnamon bun from the bakery downstairs. "You did it," she said, raising her glass. "You started over. To second beginnings," I said. "To never again mistaking endurance for love," she added. We laughed. And for once it didn't feel like survival. It felt like celebration. Then came the letter. It arrived in an envelope without a return address. The handwriting was Gavin's, still slightly slanted, still a little messy from when he was 9, and refused to slow down. I sat with it in my hands for several minutes before I opened it. It wasn't an apology, just a line. "Can we talk?" No acknowledgement of what had happened, no responsibility, just a reach. I folded the letter once, slid it into a drawer beside my grocery list, and chose not to reply. He wasn't asking to mend. He was asking for access. I wasn't ready to offer it. A week later, the phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. The voicemail came an hour later. It was Gavin. His voice sounded thinner, less sure. "Mom, things have gotten complicated. Brielle's in trouble. There was a financial investigation, some of the stuff. She opened credit lines in other people's names. It's bad." A pause. "I don't know what to do. I need help." I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone still in my lap. This was the moment I used to imagine, him realizing, calling, needing me. But I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing but stillness. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. Children were riding scooters. A woman was watering her balcony plants. Life was moving, forward, indifferent. I whispered into the quiet, not to him, but to myself. "You made your choices. So did I, and I turned off my phone." Family was never just blood. It took me too long to realize that. Too long clinging to the idea that sharing DNA meant something unbreakable, something holy. But family, real family, is not forged in birth. It's forged in how people show up for you, or how they don't. Some roots grow deep and give life. others tangle and choke. One gray morning in early fall, I drove out to the cemetery where David had been buried 22 years earlier. I hadn't been in a long time, not because I didn't love him, but because every visit used to remind me how many parts of myself were buried with him. But this time was different. I brought a small sunflower wrapped in ribbon. I sat by the stone and talked, not out loud, just in that silent way you do when you need someone who's gone to hear you anyway. I stayed small, I admitted, because I thought love meant disappearing, but I know better now, and I forgive myself for learning late. A breeze passed over the grass, soft and cool. I stood lighter than I had arrived. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drawn toward something new. Lorna had once mentioned a shelter downtown, new routes for young women escaping abusive relationships. I reached out, asked if they needed volunteers, anything, sorting donations, cleaning, organizing. Instead, they asked if I'd be willing to teach a journaling class. I hesitated, then said yes. The first day, I stood in front of a circle of girls, most no older than 20. Some looked defiant. Others looked like I once did, small, quiet, eyes on the floor. We started with prompts, then moved to truth-telling. I want them to know, I told Lorna one evening after class, that writing your story is an act of survival. By the third session, they started sharing short poems, memories, rage, regret. One girl wrote, "He taught me silence, she taught me shame. I taught myself how to leave." I wrote it on a sticky note and kept it inside my notebook. At the end of the month, the center held a small gathering: donors, volunteers, staff, and the women they served. I was given a small glass plaque, in gratitude for courage shared and space held. They asked me to say a few words. I walked up to the mic, not shaking. Not anymore. I was taught that silence made me good, that shrinking made me lovable, that endurance was strength. But I've learned you can outgrow anything, even the lies you were raised on. The room was still. A few women wiped tears. I smiled. After the event, I stopped at a small jewelry boutique near the shelter. I'd passed it dozens of times, always admiring the window display. That day I walked in. I picked out a simple gold ring, sleek, no gems, just solid and warm. I asked if it could be engraved. The woman behind the counter smiled. "What would you like it to say?" I paused, then answered, "Still becoming." The call came on a Tuesday morning. I let it go to voicemail. The name lit up my screen. Gavin. But I didn't reach for it. I watched the seconds tick by as his voice spilled into the machine, one word at a time. "Mom, I don't know what to say. You were right. About everything. About her. She broke us. I should have stood up for you. I should have done something. I just..." A pause. Then, "I'm sorry. It wasn't practiced. It wasn't polished." But I didn't press replay. I sat still for a long time. The tea I had made went cold. The lavender plant beside the window caught the light, dancing gently in the breeze. I didn't cry. I'd already cried too much for someone who had mistaken passivity for peace. Gavin's silence had been its own choice. And this apology, late, fragile, unfinished, wasn't a key to reopen the door. It was just a postscript. That afternoon, I opened a drawer and pulled out a photo. The three of us. Taken during their engagement party. I was smiling in that way women do when they don't want to ruin the moment. Brielle was pressed close to Gavin, her smile all sharpness and shine. Gavin stood in the middle, tall, safe, oblivious. I held it over the kitchen sink and struck a match. It caught quickly, burned down the middle, curling Brielle's face first, then Gavin's. My own smile vanished last. The ashes blew away with a gust from the open window. Outside, on the small balcony I'd come to think of as my sanctuary, the lavender bloomed. When I first planted it, I didn't know if it would survive. The soil had been dry, the roots clumsy. But day by day, it had taken hold. Now, the purple bud stood tall, resilient, beautiful without anyone else's permission. That evening, I opened my journal. Not every bridge is meant to be rebuilt. I underlined it twice. I went to bed with the windows open, the scent of lavender drifting in like a benediction. The next morning I checked my email. An anonymous sender, no subject line, just a short message and 2 attachments. The message read, "You deserve to know the whole truth." The screenshots were unmistakable. Brielle, texting another man, intimate, deceptive. The timestamps spanned years, even before they were married. I stared at the screen, unmoved, not surprised, just sad for the girl I used to be, the one who bent and broke trying to welcome someone who only ever came to conquer. I closed the laptop. Some truths don't deserve a response, just release. It started with an essay. I called it, When Family is a Lie. 5,000 words of unfiltered memory, bruised truths, sharp edges, and the quiet liberation of walking away from the people who mistook me for a doormat. I submitted it on a whim to a literary magazine known for publishing women's stories of resilience, a place I never imagined would say yes. 2 weeks later, they accepted it. A month after that, it went live. By the end of the day, my inbox was flooded. Subject lines like, I thought it was just me, and you wrote my life. The comments under the article spiraled into the hundreds, women sharing their own names, real or chosen, breaking open like dammed rivers. You saved me from calling my mother-in-law crazy. I left. I walked out after I read this. I didn't know someone else had lived my story. Each message felt like a hand reaching across some unseen abyss, fingers brushing mine. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. The momentum carried me. I'd always loved storytelling, but now it felt necessary. So I launched a podcast, small at first. I recorded episodes from the corner of my bedroom with a makeshift mic, talking into the silence like I was writing letters to the version of me that had stayed silent for too long. I called it Still Becoming. The first few episodes were about boundaries, grief, midlife identity. I didn't overproduce it. I didn't filter my voice. Then episode 6, You're Not Family Just Because You Say So. It exploded. Thousands of listens in one day. Then tens of thousands, comments, reviews, DMs, women from Ohio to Oregon, nurses, single moms, grandmothers, divorced daughters, retired teachers. They all said the same thing in different ways. This saved me. This was the push I needed. This reminded me I'm not crazy, just conditioned. That week, a literary agent reached out, then a second, then a publisher. Your voice is sharp, clear, needed, the email said. We'd love to see a proposal. I sat on the floor of my apartment that night, phone in hand, journal beside me, heart thudding in a rhythm I hadn't felt since before Gavin was born. Joy. That's what it was. Not the loud, manic kind. The quiet kind, the kind that sits beside you and nods like an old friend. I used the podcast earnings and a portion of the book advance to buy something I'd wanted for years. A desk. Not a table, not a borrowed surface. A real desk. Walnut. With brass handles and drawers deep enough to hold every journal I'd ever filled. I placed it by the window where the light came in at just the right angle in the mornings. Above it, I hung a small canvas print of a quote I'd once scribbled in a class with Lorna. Your story doesn't require permission to be told. I wrote there every day, essays, podcast notes, the first draft of the book, and every episode I ended the same way. Not everyone gets to call you family, and that's okay. Because it is. It really is. The house looked smaller now. I passed it on a cool Saturday morning, just as the leaves had begun to turn. Warm oranges clung to the trees like they were resisting winter's pull. I didn't mean to walk by the old street, but when my feet turned that way, I let them. The house stood freshly painted, new shutters, wind chimes dancing in the breeze. A little girl's laughter echoed through the open garage. A man whistled while fixing a bike. Someone had planted daisies by the mailbox. It no longer belonged to me. And, for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of that. I smiled. A quiet, genuine curve of the mouth that didn't come with bitterness or longing, just gratitude. The bridge had burned behind me. But I had learned to walk through smoke with my eyes open. Later that week, I closed the last checking account tied to my old life. The teller asked, Are you sure you want to do this? I smiled. Very sure. She slid me the final receipt, and I folded it slowly before tucking it away. Symbolic, maybe, but powerful. It wasn't about the money. It was about the final string. Snipped, snapped, gone. That weekend, the bookstore held the launch for my memoir. Still Becoming: How I Rebuilt a Life After Losing What I Loved. The shop was small and tucked between a bakery and a boutique, the kind with creaky floors and handwritten genre signs, the kind where stories felt at home. My book sat on a wooden display table near the entrance, under a sign that read, Local Voices, Loud Truths. I walked in without fanfare, just one of many. There it was, my name, my story, my spine resting between hard covers that didn't shrink from what I'd lived through. As I stood there, someone picked up the book, a woman, maybe in her 40s, holding a latte and a red scarf, brows furrowed as she turned the first few pages. She writes like she's breathing, the woman said to her friend, like her words are oxygen. I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because I wasn't standing there to be recognized. I was there to remember. That night, back in my apartment, I lit a single candle by the desk. I wrote a short note in my journal. She said I wasn't family, and that's when I finally remembered who I was before they named me mother. I underlined it. Once. Then I closed the journal. Outside, the wind carried a hint of coming winter, but the lavender still stood in bloom on my balcony. And I was still becoming, still writing, still free. If this story stirred something in you, don't silence it. Share it with someone who's still calling a cage a home. Your voice has power, your story has weight, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is rewrite the ending.